During the Second World War, the balance between offense and defense often shifted because of technology. For German soldiers who relied heavily on the superiority of their panzer divisions, the sudden appearance of a shoulder-fired rocket launcher in the hands of ordinary American infantrymen was a shock. The weapon came to be known as the Bazooka, and General Dwight D. Eisenhower himself would later describe it as one of the weapons of victory that helped tilt the war in the Allies' favor. To understand why this weapon was so significant, one has to imagine the battlefield before its arrival. In the early years of the war, tanks seemed nearly unstoppable. German blitzkrieg tactics in Poland and France had shown the devastating power of massed armor moving quickly across open terrain. Infantry soldiers had very little to counter tanks. They carried rifles, grenades, and occasionally heavy anti-tank rifles, but these were either ineffective against improving armor or too cumbersome to carry into fast-moving battle zones. Artillery could knock out tanks, but artillery pieces were heavy, required crews, and often could not be repositioned quickly enough to meet sudden armored thrusts. The infantrymen, marching through mud or crouching behind hedgerows, could only watch helplessly as steel beasts roared past. This imbalance terrified soldiers. Morale was fragile when men knew that no matter how brave they were, if a tank rolled toward them, their rifles and courage meant little. Commanders understood this psychological burden. Eisenhower, a general who valued not only logistics and planning but also the fighting spirit of his men, wanted to ensure infantry could face tanks without despair. He saw technology as a way to give soldiers confidence. That is why when the bazooka appeared, it was more than just a weapon, it was a symbol that the ordinary foot soldier could once again stand a chance against the might of armored divisions. The weapon's development came from a simple idea that had been floating around since the 1930s. The principle of the shaped charge, a cone-shaped explosive designed to focus energy into a small point and pierce armor, was already known. What the U.S. Army Ordnance Department needed was a way to deliver such a charge at range, safely, without requiring massive equipment. Engineers Edward Uhl and Leslie Skinner experimented with rockets and tubes until they produced a working design, a lightweight launch tube just over 5 feet long, open at both ends, capable of firing a small rocket with enough explosive force to penetrate the armor of most contemporary tanks. When American soldiers first saw the prototype, they joked that it resembled the musical instrument played by comedian Bob Burns. He had popularized a homemade trombone-like device he called the Bazooka, and the name stuck. It was humorous, almost cartoonish, but the weapon was deadly serious. The first versions were rushed into production in 1942. They were crude but functional. Eisenhower, who oversaw Allied operations in Europe, immediately recognized the potential. Here was a weapon that was light enough to carry, simple enough for a soldier to learn in minutes, and powerful enough to make tanks vulnerable. He approved rapid deployment. By the time of the North African campaign, American soldiers were already carrying bazookas into battle. The effect was immediate. For the first time, infantry could ambush German tanks at close range and have a real chance of destroying them. German crews, who once felt secure behind several inches of steel, now faced a new and terrifying threat from hidden infantry. A single well-aimed rocket could turn a Panzer into a burning wreck. Reports from Tunisia described German soldiers who were stunned when their armor was destroyed by what looked like a simple pipe on an American's shoulder. This psychological effect was as important as the physical destruction. Tanks relied not only on steel but also on the aura of invincibility. The bazooka shattered that aura. However, the weapon was not perfect. Early models had issues with reliability. Misfires were not uncommon, and the rocket's accuracy diminished beyond 100 yards. Soldiers had to get dangerously close to use it effectively, which meant ambushing tanks from cover or waiting for the right moment. Still, even with these limitations, it provided a level of protection that infantry had never known before. German forces quickly took notice. They captured some bazookas in North Africa and studied them. The Germans were impressed, and in classic wartime fashion, they created their own versions. By 1943, the German Panzerfaust and later the Panzerschreck were introduced, directly inspired by the American design. In fact, the German Panzerschreck was essentially a larger, heavier bazooka, capable of firing a more powerful rocket. This was one of the ironies of war. A weapon that had given American soldiers a fighting chance inspired the enemy to build something even deadlier. Yet the original bazooka maintained a critical role. It was not only used against tanks. Soldiers found it useful for knocking out bunkers, machine gun nests, and fortified positions. In the hedgerow fighting after D-Day, the bazooka became a versatile tool. Infantry teams used it to punch holes in walls, clear obstacles, or destroy pillboxes. Its psychological impact extended beyond tank crews. German infantrymen, too, were wary of its destructive power. Eisenhower later remarked that the bazooka was one of the 4 key weapons that helped secure Allied victory, along with the atomic bomb, the Jeep, and the C-47 transport plane. His assessment underscored how much the weapon contributed not just tactically but strategically. By giving infantry the means to resist tanks, the bazooka prevented German armored spearheads from achieving the overwhelming breakthroughs they had once enjoyed in Poland and France. The Germans were indeed stunned when the weapon first appeared, but they adapted quickly. Their tanks grew heavier, their armor thicker. By 1944, some German tanks like the Tiger and Panther could survive direct hits from the bazooka unless struck at weak points. This led to a continuous arms race. American engineers responded with improved versions, including the M9 and M18 models, which fired more powerful rockets and were easier to reload. Soldiers learned to aim at vulnerable areas: the sides, the rear, the tracks. In urban combat, they used elevation, firing from buildings into thinner top armor. Battlefield accounts illustrate both the triumphs and the risks of the weapon. In Italy, Allied infantry ambushed German tanks moving through narrow streets, disabling them at close range. In Normandy, paratroopers carried bazookas during the D-Day landings, giving lightly armed units a crucial defense against counterattacks. In the Ardennes during the Battle of the Bulge, when German tanks surged through snow-covered forests, bazooka teams fought desperate delaying actions, sometimes halting entire armored columns long enough for reinforcements to arrive. For the German side, encountering the weapon forced tactical changes. Tank commanders became more cautious, often accompanied by infantry screens to hunt down bazooka teams before they could fire. The psychological advantage of the Panzer divisions diminished. No longer could German armor roam the battlefield unchecked. The simple tube on an American's shoulder had rewritten the rules of engagement. The bazooka's legacy extended beyond the Second World War. After 1945, it influenced nearly every army in the world. Portable rocket launchers became standard equipment. The Soviet Union developed the RPG series, directly inspired by the concept. Modern anti-tank guided missiles owe their lineage to the idea pioneered by the bazooka. It had proven that giving infantry a lightweight, shoulder-fired weapon could level the field against armor. What made the bazooka so extraordinary was not just its technology but the timing of its arrival. Had it appeared earlier, it might have slowed the German blitzkrieg in France. Arriving in 1942–43, it played its part in turning the tide as the Allies gained momentum. Eisenhower, ever the pragmatic commander, understood that wars are not won only by grand strategies but by giving ordinary soldiers the tools to survive and fight effectively. He saw the bazooka as precisely that kind of tool. The Germans were stunned at first, but like all militaries, they adapted. Yet the shock of those early encounters left a deep mark. Tank crews who once felt safe began to fear hidden infantry with strange tubes on their shoulders. The battlefield had changed forever. Eisenhower's weapon of victory did not single-handedly win the war, but it symbolized how innovation, speed of deployment, and leadership could combine to change outcomes. The bazooka was also a lesson in how morale and psychology shape combat. For the American soldier, carrying a bazooka meant empowerment. It meant no longer being defenseless against steel monsters. For the German soldier, hearing the whoosh of a rocket meant realizing that even the strongest armor was not invulnerable. The weapon forced respect on both sides. In the end, the bazooka became more than just a technical innovation. It became part of the story of how the Allies overcame the once fearsome German war machine. It represented creativity in engineering, urgency in wartime production, and the will of leaders like Eisenhower to ensure that no soldier faced battle without hope. When Eisenhower called it a weapon of victory, he was not exaggerating. He was acknowledging that sometimes the simplest tools, given to ordinary men, can change the fate of nations. And so, the image remains: a soldier crouched behind cover, a metal tube balanced on his shoulder, the flash of ignition, the roar of a rocket, and in the distance, a tank once considered unstoppable brought to a halt. That moment captures why Germans were stunned and why the bazooka holds its place in the history of the Second World War as one of the most important innovations of the conflict.